Hello, in this presentation we shall be discussing the prohibition of images in the Old Testament. By way of the presentation plan, we shall divide it into 8 chapters. As you can see on the screen, the first deals with the prohibition of images in the Old Testament, and the second will explore the dominant currents of Aniconism, followed by the categorization of scholarly views, and then we shall have to make a distinction between two phenomena: the ancient Israelite religion and the biblical religion. That itself will launch us into discussing the Aniconism of the biblical religion, as well as the observations on the origin of biblical Aniconism from the scholarly perspective. The reasons for Aniconism from the biblical perspective we constitute the 7th chapter, which will be followed finally by the ideological dynamics behind an iconic rhetoric in the Hebrew Bible. What is an iconism, if we are to define it? In a seminal monograph that greatly impacted on the debate regarding the use of cultic images for the representation of the deity, D.N.D. Mettinger defines image as referring to iconic representation of the gods, while an iconism refers to cults where there is no iconic representation of the deity, be it anthropomorphic or theriomorphic. Hence, an iconism involves an iconic symbol or sacred emptiness. 3 basic points are accentuated in its definition. The first is the focus on the absence of iconic symbol as a dominant or central cultic symbol. The second allows for the presence of, for instance, iconic votive gifts at the cultic place, while the third allows for the possible tolerance of what he describes as the de facto aniconism, which describes an attitude of indifference to images with a relaxed, tolerant posture as against the much later programmatic aniconism, which is decidedly intolerant. Now we are adopting our own referential strategy, which takes an iconism to extend to all possible forms of reference or representation: anthropomorphic, theriomorphic, physiomorphic, lithonomorphic, whatever. Every kind of image is included in this strategy. It is one which differentiates and distances the deity, Yahweh in particular, from any sort of physical or mental icon in a stable or fixed form. Roughly speaking, there have been 2 currents in explanations of biblical aniconism. The first is a historical explanation that pointed to a presumed aniconic heritage. More recent scholarship explains the rise of aniconism and the rise of aniconic claims by particular circumstances in the history of Israel and Judah. And the second is a conceptual explanation that maintained an inherent incompatibility between the notion of Yahweh and iconic images. What explanations should be added are normally based on a fundamentally positive attitude among the scholars involved towards the biblical prohibition of images. Few or none would regard it a weakness or failure. The categorization which we find among scholars, especially in Germany and the United Kingdom, open up a threefold division: the classic position that holds that cultic images were forbidden from the earliest times, an evolutionary position in which there was a gradual rejection of images in worship context, and the revolutionary position in which there was a sudden shift in attitude towards an iconography that resulted in the destruction of cultic images, as well as firm laws prohibiting their manufacture and use. An extra dimension of the debate that has been hotly and sometimes vehemently contested is on the possibility of the cultic image of Yahweh standing in the first temple. Some scholars say no, some others say yes, and that it was even there until the Hasmonean period. Here we have highlighted some specific texts which bring into perspective the various facets of religion in the Bible, iconic quotes versus an iconic quote. Even though in the long run, the final redactors, final editors of the Bible would lean towards the iconic tradition, you could see from the text that there was a dynamics between various forms of worshippers, those who followed various deities and made images to represent them, while the other group continued to criticize, censure these deities with all kind of strictures against the as provided by the law in the Old Testament. In the Aniconism of the biblical religion, major text for consideration is Exodus chapter 20, verses 4 and 5, which is generally known as the second commandment. Lo ta'aseh lecha pezel v'cho temuna asher b'shamayim mimal v'asher ba'aretz mitachat v'asher b'mayim mitachat la'aretz. Lo tishtahave lahem ve'lo tavdem v'tavdem ki anochi Adonai Elohecha Elkaneh. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Pezel, or puzzle, so to speak, is a verb which means to cut or shape something, such as stone or wood, and the noun pezel refers to the material object. Temona refers to its form or manifestation, the likeness of that object which is shaped or carved, but usually made for use in the worship of the deity. Now, there are various other texts that denounce these images or representing the deity with any sort of image, and one can notice specifically the kind of descriptions made of these realities: gods of silver, gods of gold, gods of cast metal, Gilulim, Shikut, Sehem, and all kinds of derogatory names that are used to refer to these realities. Now, there have been various scholarly opinions as to the origin of Aniconism. The opinions differ. There was the Mosaic law paradigm, which existed much earlier for many centuries until the paradigm shift in the middle of the last century, in which Aniconism has been explained to have developed very much late in the history of Israel, specifically beginning with the Deuteronomistic history, which would be around the exilic period, although some would say the late monarchy and then into the exilic period. Whereas those scholars who have the post-exilic period or the Persian period as their own arguments, while a few would argue for the Hellenistic and Hasmonean periods. Here we have especially Herbert Near and Thomas Romer. Some scholars even advocate the existence of a divine image in the Holy of Holies of the Second Temple. Here I'm quoting Near, which may perhaps have been kept there until the Hasmonean period, namely until the rededication of the temple in December 164 BC, when it was removed because of its Hellenistic associations. Thus, it seems that only from the Hasmonean period onwards we have a general tendency towards Aniconism in Jewish religion. Now, if we explore from the evidence of the biblical writers themselves, we would find some of the motives and ideological underpinnings for which Aniconism was propounded and defended. I have classified these various motives into 4 groups. The first is incomparability of Yahweh. The second is the command of Yahweh based on divine authority. The third is abhorrence, and the fourth is derision. As it were, for the biblical authors, Yahweh is like no other, incomparable to no other, not a god, not any image made by human hands, be it anthropomorphic or theriomorphic or whatever sort of image that one would want to think, because no one can see the transcendent divinity and so cannot be likened to anything. And because he is omnipotent and he possesses utmost authority, his command is to be kept, and that command in Exodus chapter 20 verses 4 and 5 and other parts of the Bible specifically state that no image, no idol should be made, and they should not bow down to any, nor worship any other god. Especially in the prophets, but also in the legal texts, we find certain kinds of terminologies like Shikutehem, Gilulehem, all of these, your idols, your detestable things, all of this trying to refer to images or the other deities as unworthy of being conceptualized or termed within the domain of divinity. In other words, they should be abhorred, they should be rejected, they should be detested and seen as abominable. And also specific kind of language terminologies are used to deride these deities and these gods, so that no association whatever is to be made with them. 4 summaries or summary classifications of these reasons are that Yahweh is an invisible and transcendent God, that Israel, the people of Yahweh, are a people with a unique identity, deserving also cultic uniqueness, and that the imageless cult represents ancient Israel's rational advance over the world view symbolized by the foreign cults that utilize images. And finally, the conceptual understanding that images are fixed entities, while Yahweh is personal and versatile, a historical God, an ever-dynamic agent in time, who therefore cannot be kept stable in an image. And finally, we would like to bring this presentation to a close with a quotation from Jill Middlemas's book on the divine image. The Niconic rhetoric of the Hebrew Bible reveals new ways to think about Yahweh's being and has implications for how we conceive and speak of God. The construction and creation of new metaphors for Yahweh stands firmly in the biblical and iconic tradition and mitigates against the creation of a single and stable image of the divine, promotes strategies to resist the fashioning of the deity in an image projected by human beings, and ultimately attests to a transcendent and present God whose diversity matches the wonders of creation. Thank you for following through this presentation. We shall be back again with the next edition on Bible and ancient history.